42 years of marriage. 42 years of believing I knew the man who slept beside me every night. 42 years of trusting his words, his promises, his love. All of it shattered in a single moment when I saw my husband Robert pressing his lips against another woman's mouth in the parking lot of Romano's Italian restaurant, the same restaurant where he claimed to be having a boring business dinner with old colleagues. Before I begin my story, let me know in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is. I just want to know I'm not alone in this. And if you feel moved by what you hear, consider subscribing. It helps more people become aware of the reality of betrayal in long marriages. Now let me tell you what really happened. My name is Margaret Sullivan, but everyone calls me Maggie. At 67, I thought I had life figured out. Robert and I lived in the same colonial house in Westport, Connecticut, that we'd bought when our oldest, Michael, was just a baby. The mortgage was paid off, the retirement funds were healthy, and our 3 children were successful adults with families of their own. I should have been the happiest woman alive. Robert had retired 6 months earlier from his position as a senior executive at Hartford Insurance, where he'd worked for 35 years. I'd retired from my job as head librarian at the Westport Public Library 2 years before that, thinking we'd finally have time to travel, to reconnect, to enjoy the golden years we'd worked so hard for. Instead, I found myself more alone than I'd ever been. "I'm meeting with some consultants tonight," Robert announced that Tuesday morning in March, barely looking up from his coffee and newspaper. "Probably won't be home until late." I glanced at him over my own cup of tea. Earl Grey, the same blend I'd been drinking for 20 years. "Consultants. I thought you were retired." "I am retired," he said, his tone slightly irritated. "But Jim Morrison asked if I'd consider doing some freelance work for his firm. You know how it is, Maggie, they need experienced people." Jim Morrison. I knew the name. Robert had mentioned him before, someone from his old company who'd started his own consulting business. It made sense, I supposed. Robert had always been energetic driven. Maybe full retirement was harder on him than I'd realized. "Well, that's nice, dear," I said, forcing a smile. "Will you be home for dinner? Better not wait up. These business dinners can go quite late." He folded his newspaper with a crisp snap and stood, straightening his tie. Even retired, Robert still dressed like he was heading to the office every day. Pressed slacks, button-down shirt, tie, jacket. "Old habits," he said. "Have a good day," he called out, grabbing his keys from the hook by the door. "You too, honey." The house felt enormous after he left. 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a formal dining room we rarely used. A living room with furniture I'd carefully selected 15 years ago, but that now felt more like a museum display than a home. I wandered from room to room, straightening things that were already straight, dusting surfaces that weren't dusty. This had become my routine over the past few months. Robert would leave for his mysterious meetings and consulting appointments, and I would pace around our empty house like a ghost haunting her own life. I called my best friend Sarah around 11. "He's gone again," I said without preamble when she picked up. "Business meeting?" Sarah asked. She'd been hearing about Robert's sudden career renaissance for weeks now. "Consulting dinner with Jim Morrison's people." I carried the cordless phone to the kitchen window and looked out at my neighbor's perfectly manicured lawn. "He won't be home until late." "Maggie. Honey, maybe you should find something to occupy your time. Have you thought about volunteering or taking a class?" Sarah meant well, but she didn't understand. She'd lost her husband Paul to a heart attack 2 years ago, and while I felt terrible for her loss, at least she knew where she stood. She was grieving, yes, but she wasn't confused. She wasn't wondering why the person she'd built her entire adult life around suddenly seemed like a stranger. "Maybe," I said, though I had no intention of signing up for pottery classes or joining the hospital auxiliary. "Sarah, can I ask you something?" "Of course. When Paul was alive, did you ever feel like you were living with someone you didn't really know?" There was a long pause. "What do you mean?" "I mean, did you ever look at him and think, 'Who is this person?' Did you ever feel like maybe you'd been married to an idea of someone rather than the actual person?" "Maggie, what's brought this on?" I couldn't explain it properly, even to Sarah. It wasn't that Robert was cruel or obviously different. It was subtler than that. He was polite, cordial even. He said good morning and good night. He paid the bills and mowed the lawn and remembered to take out the trash. But it felt like he was performing the role of husband rather than actually being one. "Nothing specific." I lied. "I guess retirement is an adjustment for both of us." It takes time, honey. You've both spent decades with very structured lives. Maybe Robert needs these consulting jobs to feel useful. After we hung up, I tried to convince myself that Sarah was right. Robert was adjusting. I was adjusting. This phase would pass, and we'd find our rhythm again. But that evening, as I sat alone at our dining room table eating leftover pot roast, while Robert was supposedly discussing quarterly projections over Ossoboko, I felt something shift inside me. A tiny seed of doubt that I'd been trying to ignore finally cracked open. I looked around our house, really looked at it. The family photos on the mantel, the artwork we'd collected over the years, the furniture we'd chosen together. It all looked like props in a play about a happy marriage. When had it started feeling this way? When had Robert started feeling like a stranger? When had I started feeling invisible? It was nearly midnight when I heard Robert's key in the front door. I was in bed, pretending to sleep, but I listened to him moving around downstairs, hanging up his coat, turning off lights, climbing the stairs with careful, quiet steps. He slipped into bed beside me, and I caught a whiff of something unfamiliar. Not just the usual restaurant smell of garlic and wine, but something else. Something floral and feminine. Perfume. My heart began to pound so hard I was sure he could hear it. But Robert simply settled onto his side of the bed, his back to me, and within minutes his breathing deepened into sleep. I lay awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling, that seed of doubt blooming into something much larger and more frightening. 3 days later, Robert announced another consulting dinner. Same group? I asked, keeping my voice casual. Different client. Jim's really building something special with his firm. Where are you meeting this time? Romano's. You know, that Italian place on Post Road. I nodded, smiling. Have fun, dear. But this time, I wasn't going to sit home wondering. This time, I was going to find out exactly what kind of consulting my husband was doing. At 7:30 that evening, I drove to Romano's Italian restaurant. My hands were shaking as I gripped the steering wheel, and I kept telling myself I was being ridiculous. I was a suspicious old woman creating drama where none existed. Robert would be inside with a table full of boring insurance executives, and I would feel foolish for doubting him. I parked across the street where I had a clear view of the restaurant's entrance and the small parking lot beside it. Robert's silver Bic was there, parked near the back. At 8:15 I saw him emerge from the restaurant. He wasn't alone. The woman with him was younger, not young, but younger than me. Maybe in her early 50s, with shoulder-length black hair and an elegant navy dress that fit her slim figure perfectly. She was pretty in a refined way, the kind of woman who looked like she spent time and money on her appearance. They stood close together beside her car, talking and laughing. Too close. The kind of close that married people maintain with each other, not with business colleagues. And then it happened. Robert reached out and tucked a strand of her hair behind her ear. The gesture was so intimate, so tender, that my breath caught in my throat. She smiled up at him, and he leaned down and kissed her. Not a friendly peck on the cheek. Not a professional handshake. A real kiss. A lover's kiss. I sat in my car, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white, and watched my husband of 42 years kiss another woman like he used to kiss me when we were young and desperately in love. They parted reluctantly, and she got into her car, a red Honda Civic. Robert stood there watching as she drove away, his face soft with an expression I hadn't seen in years. Love. He looked like a man in love. I drove home in a daze, my mind reeling. By the time Robert came through the door at 10:30, I was sitting in the living room, still in my coat, staring at nothing. Maggie, you okay, honey? Why are you sitting in the dark? I looked up at him, really looked. His tie was slightly askew. His hair was mussed. And yes, there was that perfume again, faint but unmistakably feminine. Fine, I managed. Just tired. Well, you should get to bed. I'm going to grab a quick shower. As I listened to the water running upstairs, I tried to process what I'd witnessed. 42 years of marriage, 3 children, a mortgage, joint bank accounts, shared dreams and disappointments, and ordinary Tuesday mornings over coffee. All of it built on what? Had he loved me once? Truly loved me, or had I been fooling myself all these years? And who was she? How long had this been going on? The questions swirled through my mind like a storm, but underneath them all was a deeper, more fundamental realization that changed everything. I didn't know my husband at all. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Robert's hands in that woman's hair, saw the tender way he looked at her, saw him kiss her like she was precious to him, like I used to be precious to him. By morning I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to confront Robert. Not yet. If I'd learned anything in my 42 years of marriage, it was that Robert Sullivan was an excellent liar when he wanted to be. If I accused him without proof, he'd deny everything, and I'd end up questioning my own sanity. No, I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with before I said a word. Robert came down to breakfast looking refreshed and cheerful, humming under his breath as he poured his coffee. "Sleep well?" he asked, settling into his usual chair with the morning paper. "Fine," I lied, buttering my toast with shaking hands. "You seemed to enjoy your dinner last night." "Oh, it was productive." "Very productive." He smiled over his coffee cup, and I wondered if he was thinking about her. "Jim's really assembled an impressive team. Anyone I might know?" Robert's hand paused for just a moment as he reached for the sugar bowl. "I don't think so. Mostly younger people, recent graduates, career changers. You know how the insurance business is evolving. Younger people, career changers?" Was that what she was? A career changer in her early 50s who happened to catch my husband's eye. "Well, I'm glad you're feeling fulfilled," I said, my voice sounding strange even to my own ears. After Robert left for another day of supposed consulting, I sat at my kitchen table and tried to think rationally. What did I actually know? Her car was a red Honda Civic. She was probably in her early to mid-50s, attractive, well-dressed. She had black hair and seemed comfortable in expensive restaurants. Robert had kissed her like they were intimate, familiar with each other. It wasn't much to go on, but it was a start. I spent the morning doing something I never thought I'd do. I went through Robert's things. His desk in the home office, his dresser drawers, his coat pockets. I felt like a criminal, like I was violating our marriage by snooping. Then I reminded myself that Robert was the one who'd violated our marriage by kissing another woman, and I kept searching. In his jacket pocket, the one he'd worn to Romano's, I found a receipt, not from the restaurant but from a florist. 1 dozen red roses, Lore 7850. The date was from last week. Red roses. I couldn't remember the last time Robert had brought me flowers. Our wedding anniversary was still 3 months away, and my birthday wasn't until December. My hands were trembling as I tucked the receipt back where I'd found it. Red roses for another woman while I sat at home eating leftover pot roast alone. The phone rang, making me jump. "Maggie, you sound breathless." It was Sarah. I was just cleaning. I sat down heavily in Robert's desk chair. "Sarah, hypothetically speaking, if you suspected someone's spouse was having an affair, how would you go about proving it?" There was a long silence. "Maggie, what's going on?" I told her. All of it. The mysterious dinner meetings, the late nights, the perfume. The way Robert seemed like a stranger. And finally, what I'd seen in the parking lot of Romano's. "Oh, honey," Sarah said when I finished. "Oh, Maggie, I'm so sorry. I don't know what to do. Part of me wants to confront him right now, but part of me thinks I need to know more. How long has this been going on? Who is she? Is he planning to leave me? What does your gut tell you?" I thought about it. My gut tells me this isn't just some midlife crisis fling. The way he looked at her, Sarah, he looked happy. Really happy. I haven't seen him look that way in years. Even if that's true, it doesn't excuse what he's doing. You deserve better than this, Maggie. After we hung up, I made another decision. I was going to find out who this woman was. I drove to Robert's old office building at Hartford Insurance. I'd only been there a handful of times over the years, company Christmas parties, retirement dinners, the occasional lunch date, but I remembered where it was, and I remembered some of the people Robert used to work with. The security guard in the lobby recognized me. "Mrs. Sullivan!" "Nice to see you. Here to visit someone." Actually, I was hoping to catch up with some of Robert's old colleagues. "Is Linda Chen still working here?" I wanted to thank her for something. I had no idea where the name came from. It just popped out of my mouth. "Linda Chen? Oh, she left about 6 months ago. Started her own consulting firm, I think. Real nice lady. You might try calling the main number upstairs. Someone in HR might have her contact information." Linda Chen. Asian surname, which matched the woman's appearance. Left 6 months ago, right around the time Robert retired. Started her own consulting firm, which could explain the business meetings. I thanked the security guard and left, my heart pounding. I had a name. When I got home, I did something I'd never done before. I Googled someone. It took me a while to figure out how to work the computer properly. Usually Robert handled anything technology related. But eventually I managed to type Linda Chen, Hartford Insurance into the search bar. Several results came up. Linda Chen, CPA, former senior analyst at Hartford Insurance. recently launched Chen Financial Consulting, specializing in risk assessment for small businesses. And there was her photo on what appeared to be her business website. It was her, the woman from the parking lot. Younger looking in the professional headshot, but definitely the same person. She was smiling confidently at the camera, and the bio beneath her photo mentioned her 15 years of experience in the insurance industry and her recent decision to pursue new challenges as an independent consultant. New challenges. Like seducing married men? I stared at her photo for a long time, trying to understand what Robert saw in her that he didn't see in me anymore. She was attractive, certainly, but not dramatically more so than I'd been at her age. She looked professional, accomplished, confident. Maybe that was it. Maybe Robert was attracted to her independence, her career success, her newness. Maybe after 42 years, I'd become too familiar, too predictable, too much of a known quantity. Or maybe I was overthinking it, and Robert was simply a man who decided to throw away 4 decades of marriage for the thrill of an affair with a younger woman. I printed out her photo and contact information, then cleared the computer's history. Robert was good with technology, but I didn't think he regularly checked what I'd been looking at online. That evening, Robert announced yet another business dinner. "Let me guess," I said. "Jem Morrison's consulting group. You know it. We're really making progress on some exciting projects." This time I was ready. I'd spent the afternoon planning. I knew Linda Chen's address now. It was listed on her business website. I knew what kind of car she drove, and I had a good idea of what business dinner really meant. "Well, have fun," I said, kissing Robert's cheek like I had 1,000 times before. But this time I was acting, playing the role of the trusting wife while planning my next move. An hour after Robert left, I drove to Linda Chen's address. She lived in a townhouse complex in West Hartford, about 20 minutes from our house. Her red Honda Civic was in the driveway. I parked across the street and waited. At 7:15, a silver Bic pulled into her driveway. Robert got out, carrying a bouquet of flowers, red roses I was sure, and walked to her front door like he belonged there. Like he'd done it many times before. She answered wearing a flowing skirt and silk blouse, and even from across the street I could see her face light up when she saw him. She stood on her tiptoes to kiss him, and he wrapped his free arm around her waist, pulling her close. They looked like lovers. They looked like a couple. They looked like Robert and I used to look. 20 years ago, I drove home with tears streaming down my face, but underneath the grief was something else at anger. Pure, clean anger at the man who'd promised to love and honor me, who'd stood in a church 42 years ago and vowed to forsake all others. When Robert came home that night, smelling of perfume and wine and another woman's kisses, I was waiting for him in the living room. "Good dinner?" I asked. "Very productive. We're really making headway on the Morrison account." The Morrison account. Was that what he called it now? "Robert, can I ask you something?" He was already headed for the stairs, loosening his tie. "Sure, but make it quick. I'm beat." "Do you love me?" He stopped halfway up the stairs and turned back to look at me. For a moment something flickered in his eyes, surprise maybe, or guilt. Then his expression smoothed into the polite mask he'd been wearing for months. "Of course I love you, Maggie." What kind of question is that? The kind of question a wife asks when she feels like her husband has become a stranger. "We're both adjusting to retirement, honey. It's normal to feel unsettled, normal." He made it sound like my growing sense of isolation was a common side effect of aging, like arthritis or presbyopia. Is that what this is? Adjustment? What else would it be? He started up the stairs again. "Get some sleep, Maggie. You'll feel better in the morning." But I wouldn't feel better in the morning, and we both knew it. I'd feel exactly the same like a woman whose husband was in love with someone else, and who was too much of a coward to admit it. As I listened to Robert moving around in our bedroom, I made a decision. I wasn't going to spend the rest of my life pretending that everything was fine while my husband carried on with Linda Chen. I was going to find out exactly how deep this affair went, and then I was going to decide what to do about my marriage. For the first time in months, I felt like I had a purpose. The next morning, Robert was different. Not obviously. But I'd lived with this man for 42 years, and I could sense the change in him like a shift in atmospheric pressure before a storm. He was humming again as he got dressed, some tune I didn't recognize, and there was a lightness in his step that I hadn't seen in years. He looked like a man with a secret that made him happy. "You're certainly in a good mood," I observed, watching him knot his tie in the dresser mirror. Just feeling optimistic about some new opportunities, he said, catching my eye in the reflection. Jem thinks there might be some long-term potential in this consulting work. Long-term potential. With Linda Chen, no doubt? That's wonderful, dear. Will you be working late again tonight? Probably. We're in a critical phase with one of the projects. I nodded and smiled, playing my part perfectly. But inside I was planning. After Robert left, I called Sarah. I need your help, I said without preamble. I need to follow them. Maggie, honey, are you sure that's wise? Maybe you should just confront him with what you already know. I need to understand what I'm dealing with first. Is this just physical? Are they planning a future together? Is he going to ask for a divorce? My voice cracked on the last word. Even saying it out loud felt like swallowing glass. Okay, Sarah said after a moment. What do you need? Can you borrow your son's car for the evening? Robert might recognize mine if he sees it twice. 3 hours later, Sarah and I were sitting in her son Tommy's blue Honda Accord, parked outside Linda Chen's townhouse complex. I felt ridiculous, 2 women in their 60s playing private investigator, but I needed to know. There, I said, pointing as Robert's silver Buick turned into the complex. Right on schedule. We watched him park and walk to Linda's door, carrying what looked like a bag of takeout food. Chinese food. I realized with a bitter laugh, how culturally appropriate. They're having dinner at her place, Sarah said. That's pretty domestic. It gets worse. I'd spent the morning doing more internet research, and what I'd found had made me sick to my stomach. I looked up her divorce records. She's been divorced for 3 years. Her ex-husband lives in California with their 2 kids. So she's available. Completely available. And according to her LinkedIn profile, she's 49 years old. 49, Sarah. 18 years younger than me. Sarah reached over and squeezed my hand. Age is just a number, Maggie. You're beautiful and vital, and I'm 60, 7 years old with gray hair and crow's feet and a body that's been through 3 pregnancies. She's 49 and looks like she spends her free time at yoga classes. I stared at Linda's front door, where warm light glowed through the windows. I can't compete with that. You shouldn't have to compete for your own husband. We sat in silence for a while, watching the townhouse. At one point, I saw 2 silhouettes move past the living room window, close together, and I had to look away. Maggie, Sarah said gently, what are you hoping to accomplish here? You already know they're having an affair. I need to know if he's planning to leave me. The words came out as barely a whisper. I need to know if I should be looking for a lawyer or if I should try to fight for my marriage. And you think sitting outside her house will tell you that? Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with a text message from Robert, working very late tonight. Don't wait up. Love you. Love you. He was inside another woman's house, probably about to spend the night in her bed, and he was texting me that he loved me. I showed the message to Sarah, and I saw her face tighten with anger. That bastard, she muttered. He's covering his tracks, making sure I don't get suspicious about him being out all night. I stared at the glowing windows of Linda's townhouse. This isn't some spontaneous affair, Sarah. This is calculated, planned. We stayed until nearly midnight, when the lights in Linda's living room finally went out. Robert's car remained in the driveway. He's staying the night, I said, my voice hollow. Do you want to wait until morning? See what time he leaves? I shook my head. I'd seen enough. More than enough. The drive home was silent except for the sound of my quiet crying. Sarah walked me to my front door and hugged me tight. What are you going to do? She asked. I don't know. But I can't keep pretending everything is normal. That night, I lay alone in our king-sized bed, staring at Robert's empty pillow. We'd bought this bed 15 years ago, after his back surgery. I'd insisted on the expensive mattress because I wanted him to be comfortable. We'd made love in this bed, talked about our children's futures, held each other through bad dreams and good news in ordinary Tuesday mornings. Now he was sharing someone else's bed, while I lay here like a discarded wife. The next morning, Robert came home at 7:30, just as I was finishing my first cup of coffee. He looked freshly showered and was carrying a bag from the local bagel shop. Thought I'd bring breakfast, he said, kissing my forehead like nothing had happened. Everything bagel with cream cheese, your favorite. My favorite. He remembered my favorite bagel but forgot our marriage vows. How was your night? I asked, accepting the bag with steady hands. Long but productive. We made significant progress on the project. The project. His affair had become a project now. Where did you sleep? At Jim Morrison's office. Robert paused in the middle of pouring his coffee. There's a small apartment above the office. For late nights. Very convenient. Another lie. Smooth and effortless, delivered while he made breakfast like a considerate husband. That's nice, I said. Very thoughtful of Jim to provide that. Over the next week, I watched my husband transform into someone I didn't recognize. He started buying new clothes, younger-looking shirts, more fashionable ties. He began using cologne again, something he hadn't done in years. He got a haircut at an expensive salon instead of his usual barber. And the lies multiplied. Late meetings became overnight conferences. Free dinner with clients became weekend retreats. Every explanation was delivered with the same earnest sincerity that had once made me trust him completely. I began keeping a journal, writing down every lie, every inconsistency, every time he came home smelling like Linda Chen's perfume. The evidence was mounting, but I still didn't know what his endgame was. Then I found the credit card statements. Robert had always handled our finances, but I'd retained access to all our accounts. We'd never been secretive about money. While he was out on another, consulting dinner, I logged into our joint credit card account online. What I found there made me physically sick. Jewelry purchases from Tiffany & Co. Expensive dinners at romantic restaurants I'd never been to. Hotel charges for nights when Robert had supposedly been sleeping at Jem Morrison's office apartment. Purchases from Victoria's Secret that certainly weren't for me. But the most damaging item was at the bottom of the most recent statement, a charge for 2008-47 to Romantic Getaways Travel Agency. The date was next week, 3 days from now. I clicked on the details and found the confirmation number. My hands were shaking as I called the travel agency. "This is Mrs. Sullivan," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm calling about confirmation number RG7749. I need to verify the details." "Of course, Mrs. Sullivan. Let me pull that up. Yes, here it is. 2 nights at the Ocean House in Watch Hill, Rhode Island. Ocean View Suite with champagne service and couples massage package. You and Mr. Sullivan are going to love it. It's one of our most romantic destinations. 2 nights. Couples massage. Romantic destination. With his wife of 42 years, no. With Linda Chen." I hung up the phone and sat in Robert's office chair, staring at the credit card statement. Nearly $3,000 for a romantic weekend with his mistress, charged to our joint account. Our money I'd helped earn during my 30 years as a librarian. Money we'd saved for our retirement, our golden years together. He was spending our retirement fund on his affair. That evening, when Robert came home with his usual story about productive meetings and promising developments, I was waiting for him with a decision I'd never thought I'd have to make. "Robert, we need to talk." "Can it wait, honey? I'm exhausted, and I have an early meeting tomorrow." "No, it can't wait." Something in my tone must have warned him, because his expression shifted from tired indifference to wary attention. "What's this about, Maggie?" I looked at this man I'd loved for more than 4 decades. This stranger who was stealing from our joint account to romance another woman. This husband who came home to me smelling like someone else's perfume and lied to my face every single day. "It's about Linda Chen." The color drained from Robert's face so quickly I thought he might collapse. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he sank into his favorite armchair, looking older than his 69 years. "How long have you known?" he asked quietly. "Long enough. I saw you kiss her in the parking lot at Romano's 3 weeks ago." Robert closed his eyes and leaned back in his chair. "Jesus, Maggie. I never meant for you to find out like that." "How did you mean for me to find out?" "When you filed for divorce. When you emptied our bank accounts. When you moved in with her." He opened his eyes and looked at me with something that might have been regret. "It's not like that." "Then tell me what it's like, Robert. Tell me exactly what it's like." And for the first time in months, my husband began to tell me the truth. Robert sat in his chair for a long moment, his hands clasped in his lap, staring at the floor. When he finally looked up at me, I saw something I hadn't seen in his eyes for years: vulnerability. "I met Linda about 8 months ago." He began, his voice barely above a whisper. "It was at Tom Bradley's retirement party. Do you remember? You had that stomach flu and couldn't come." I remembered. I'd been looking forward to the party for weeks. A chance to see Robert's old colleagues, to feel like part of his world again. Instead, I'd spent the evening in bed with a fever while he went alone. She was there representing her new consulting firm. We started talking about the industry, about the changes since we'd both left Hartford. She was interesting, intelligent. She listened when I spoke. "I listen when you speak." "Do you?" Robert's question hung in the air between us. "When was the last time we had a real conversation, Maggie?" When was the last time you asked me how I felt about retiring, about getting older, about wondering if the best years of my life were behind me? The accusation hit me like a physical blow. I tried to talk to you about retirement. You said you were fine, you said you were enjoying the freedom. I lied. Robert's confession was matter of fact, almost casual. I wasn't fine. I felt useless, irrelevant, like I'd gone from being someone important to being just another old man puttering around his house with nothing meaningful to contribute. You could have told me that. We could have worked through it together. Could we have? Really, Robert leaned forward, his eyes intense. Maggie, we've been living like roommates for years. Polite roommates who happen to share a mortgage and a history. When was the last time you looked at me with desire? When was the last time we made love without it feeling like an obligation? I opened my mouth to protest, then closed it. Because he was right, and we both knew it. Our physical intimacy had become routine, scheduled, perfunctory. I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt genuine passion for this man, or he for me. That doesn't justify what you've done, I said finally. No, it doesn't. But it explains it. Robert ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I recognized from 40 years of watching him struggle with difficult decisions. Linda makes me feel alive again. When I'm with her, I remember who I used to be. I remember what it feels like to be desired, to be exciting, to be worth someone's time and attention. You've been worth my time and attention for 42 years, have I? Or have I just been part of the furniture? Part of the routine? Wake up, coffee, newspaper, polite conversation about the weather or the neighbors or what's for dinner. When did we stop being lovers and become just companions? The questions stung because they contained too much truth. When had our marriage become comfortable instead of passionate? When had we stopped really seeing each other and started simply coexisting? How long, I asked. How long have you been sleeping with her? Robert flinched at my directness. 6 months. Since her divorce was finalized. 6 months. While I was planning our holiday decorations and worrying about whether he was eating enough vegetables, he was beginning an affair with Linda Chen. Do you love her? The pause before his answer told me everything I needed to know, but I waited anyway. Yes, he said finally. I love her. The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd known, of course. I'd seen it in his face that night in the parking lot. But hearing him say it out loud made it real in a way that all my suspicions and investigations hadn't. More than you love me. Another pause. Longer this time. Differently than I love you. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I can give you. Robert stood up and walked to the window, looking out at our perfectly manicured front lawn. I do love you, Maggie. I love our history together. I love that you're the mother of my children. I love the woman you used to be. And I respect the woman you are now. But I'm not in love with you anymore. And I don't think you're in love with me either. I wanted to deny it, to protest that of course I loved him, that our marriage was worth fighting for. But the words wouldn't come, because as much as it hurt to admit, he was right about that too. So what happens now? I asked. Do you want a divorce? I don't know. Robert turned back to face me. I never intended for this to happen, Maggie. I never set out to have an affair or to fall in love with someone else. It just happened. Affairs don't just happen, Robert. They're choices. Every phone call, every dinner, every lie you told me was a choice. You're right, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for lying to you, for deceiving you, for using our money to... He trailed off, looking ashamed. To take her on romantic getaways. Yes, I know about that too. The ocean house next weekend. $3,000 of our retirement money so you can play house with your mistress. Robert's face went pale. You saw the credit card statement. I saw everything. The jewelry, the hotels, the restaurants. You've spent over $15,000 on this affair, Robert. Our money. Money we saved together for our future? I'll pay it back. With what? You're retired, remember? We're both retired. We're living on a fixed income, and you've been spending our security on another woman. The financial betrayal somehow felt even worse than the emotional one. We'd always been careful with money, always planned for the future together. The idea that he'd been secretly spending our savings on Linda Chen made me feel like he'd stolen from me. What does she know about me? I asked. What have you told her about our marriage? Robert looked uncomfortable. She knows we're distant. That we've grown apart over the years. Does she know you're still married? Does she know you come home to me every night after you've been with her? Yes. She knows I'm married. And she's fine with that. She's fine being the other woman. She's not the other woman, Maggie. She's... Robert struggled for words. She's the woman I want to be with. You're the woman I happen to be married to. The distinction was brutal in its honesty. I sat back in my chair, feeling like all the air had been sucked out of the room. Does she want you to leave me? She's never asked me to. She knows the situation is complicated. Complicated? I laughed bitterly. Is that what 42 years of marriage is? A complication? That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean, Robert? Help me understand how the woman you've promised to love and honor has become a complication while your mistress is the woman you want to be with. Robert sat back down, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. I don't know how to explain it without hurting you more than I already have. I think we're past worrying about hurting me more. He was quiet for a long moment. Linda sees me as I am now, not as I was 20 years ago or 40 years ago. When she looks at me, she sees someone vital and interesting and capable. When you look at me, he shrugged helplessly. I don't know what you see anymore. I see my husband, the man I married, the father of my children, exactly. You see my history, not my present. Linda sees my potential. The conversation was becoming surreal. We were sitting in our living room, surrounded by 4 decades of shared memories, discussing his mistress like she was a career opportunity. So what do you want, Robert? Do you want to divorce me and marry her? I don't know. Maybe. Eventually. He looked up at me with something that might have been guilt or might have been pity. I know this is painful for you to hear, but I'm happier than I've been in years. When I'm with Linda, I feel like myself again. I feel like I matter. You matter to me? Do I? Really? Or do I just matter as part of your routine, part of your identity as a wife and mother? When was the last time you were excited to see me come home? When was the last time you initiated a conversation about something other than household logistics or family updates? I opened my mouth to answer, then closed it again. Because I couldn't remember. I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt genuine excitement about Robert coming home, or the last time I'd asked him about his thoughts or dreams rather than his schedule. That doesn't give you the right to have an affair, I said finally. No, it doesn't. But it explains why I was vulnerable to one when the opportunity arose. We sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of 42 years of marriage and 6 months of betrayal settling between us like a living thing. What happens now? I asked again. I don't know, Robert admitted. I suppose that's partly up to you. Up to me. Do you want to try to work on our marriage? Do you want to go to counseling? Do you want me to end things with Linda? The question should have been easy to answer. Of course I wanted him to end things with his mistress. Of course I wanted to save our marriage. But as I looked at this man I'd shared my adult life with, I realized something that shocked me. I wasn't sure I wanted him to choose me out of obligation. If Robert stayed with me because I demanded it, because it was the right thing to do, because ending a 42-year marriage was too complicated and expensive and socially awkward, would that be enough? Would I be satisfied being the consolation prize, the safety net, the woman he came home to because he couldn't afford to leave? I need time to think, I said. Robert nodded. I understand, and Maggie, I really am sorry. I never wanted to hurt you like this. But you did it anyway. Yes, I did it anyway. He stood up and moved toward the stairs, then stopped and turned back to me. For what it's worth, Linda asked me to tell you the truth months ago. She said it wasn't fair to keep you in the dark, that you deserved to know what was happening in your own marriage. I stared at him. Your mistress has more respect for me than you do. Robert's face crumpled slightly. It would seem that way. Yes. After he went upstairs, I sat alone in our living room, surrounded by the artifacts of our life together. Wedding photos, family portraits, vacation souvenirs, books we'd shared, furniture we'd chosen together. All of it suddenly felt like evidence from a crime scene, the murder of our marriage. But underneath the pain and betrayal, I felt something unexpected, a strange sort of relief. For months, I'd felt like I was going crazy, like I was imagining the distance between us, like I was being paranoid and suspicious for no reason. Now I knew I hadn't been imagining anything. I'd been living with the ghost of my marriage while my husband conducted his real emotional life elsewhere. The truth was devastating, but at least it was the truth. And for the first time in 6 months, I knew exactly where I stood. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was crying, though I had done plenty of that, but because my mind was racing with a clarity I hadn't experienced in months. It was as if Robert's confession had lifted a fog I hadn't even realized was clouding my thinking. By morning, I'd reached several conclusions. First, Robert was right about our marriage. We had become roommates, going through the motions of a relationship without the substance. I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt genuine excitement about spending time with him, or when we'd had a conversation that went deeper than household logistics. Second, Robert was wrong if he thought this realization absolved him of responsibility for his choices. There were other ways to handle marital dissatisfaction besides conducting a secret affair and spending our retirement savings on another woman. Third, I deserved better than being someone's consolation prize. Fourth, at 67 years old, I might be running out of time to figure out what I actually wanted from the rest of my life. Robert came down to breakfast looking haggard and uncertain. The confident man who'd been humming show tunes for weeks was gone, replaced by someone who looked like he hadn't slept either. "Good morning," he said carefully, pouring his coffee with hands that shook slightly. "Good morning." We sat across from each other at our kitchen table, the same table where we'd eaten thousands of meals, discussed our children's report cards, planned vacations, made decisions about mortgages and retirement funds and where to spend Thanksgiving. Now it felt like a negotiating table in a boardroom. "Have you thought about what I said last night?" Robert asked. "I've thought about very little else." And I looked at this man I'd loved for more than half my life. Even now, even knowing what he'd done, I could see traces of the young insurance agent I'd married in 1983. The serious brown eyes, the careful way he chose his words, the slight dimple in his chin that had charmed me when I was 25 and working at the library downtown. "I want to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." Robert nodded. "If Linda Chen disappeared tomorrow, if she moved away or decided she didn't want to see you anymore, would you be happy to come back to our marriage? Would you be satisfied being married to me for the rest of your life?" Robert was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee cup. When he looked up, his expression was pained but honest. "No," he said quietly. "I don't think I would." The answer hurt, but it was the answer I'd expected, the answer I needed to hear. "Then we both know what needs to happen," I said. "Maggie." "No, let me finish." I took a deep breath, feeling steadier than I had in months. "You're not happy in our marriage. I'm not happy in our marriage. You're in love with someone else, and I paused, realizing something I hadn't consciously acknowledged before. "I don't think I've been in love with you for a long time either." Robert's eyebrows rose in surprise. "You haven't? When was the last time I told you I loved you, and meant it as more than habit? When was the last time I felt that flutter of excitement when you walked through the door? When was the last time I chose to spend time with you rather than just ending up in the same room by default?" Robert didn't answer, but I could see the recognition in his eyes. "We've been holding on to the memory of being in love," I continued, "but neither of us has been living in the present tense of love for years." "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying I think we should get divorced." The words hung in the air between us. I'd expected them to feel devastating when I finally said them out loud, but instead they felt like relief. Robert leaned back in his chair, studying my face. "You're serious." "I'm serious. But I have conditions." "Conditions?" "First, you're going to pay back every penny you spent on your affair. I don't care if you have to get a part-time job or sell your golf clubs or ask Linda to contribute. You stole from our joint savings, and you're going to make it right." Robert nodded. "Agreed." "Second, you're going to be fair about the division of assets. I'm not going to make this ugly or expensive, but I'm not going to be generous either. We split everything 50-50. That's fair. Third, you're going to tell our children what happened. You're not going to let them think this was a mutual decision or that we simply grew apart. You're going to take responsibility for your choices." Robert's face went pale. "Maggie, do we have to involve the kids in this?" "Our children are adults, Robert. They have a right to know why their parents are divorcing after 42 years. And they have a right to hear the truth from you rather than having to guess or blame me." "They're going to be devastated." "Yes, they are. That's a consequence you should have considered before you started your affair." Robert was quiet for several minutes. Then he asked, "What about you? What are you going to do?" It was a good question. What was I going to do? For 42 years, my identity had been built around being Robert's wife, Michael and Jennifer and David's mother, the librarian who helped people find books and information. Now Michael was a successful architect in Seattle, Jennifer was a pediatrician in Boston, and David was a teacher in Portland. They were all happily married with children of their own. I'd been retired for 2 years, And soon, I wouldn't be anyone's wife. Who was Margaret Sullivan when she wasn't defined by her relationships to other people? I don't know yet, I admitted. But I'm going to figure it out. After Robert left for what I assumed was another day with Linda Chen, I called Sarah. I'm getting divorced, I announced. Oh honey, I'm so sorry. How are you holding up? Better than you might expect. Can you come over? I need to talk through some things. An hour later, Sarah and I were sitting in my living room with cups of tea and a box of tissues that, surprisingly, I wasn't really using. Tell me everything, Sarah said. I told her about the confrontation, about Robert's confession, about his admission that he loved Linda Chen and wasn't in love with me anymore. That bastard, Sarah muttered. How dare he make you feel like this is somehow your fault too? But it is, partly, I said. Sarah, he wasn't wrong about the state of our marriage. We were going through the motions. I was going through the motions? That doesn't excuse having an affair. No, it doesn't. But it means I need to take some responsibility for how we got here. I set down my teacup and looked around the room. When was the last time you heard me talk about being excited about something? Really excited, not just pleased or satisfied. Sarah thought about it. I don't know, it's been a while. I can't remember either. I think I've been sleepwalking through my life for years. Robert just woke up first. So what's the plan? Divorce. Fair but not generous. He pays back what he stole from our joint account. And then, I shrugged. And then I figure out what I want to do with the rest of my life. Any ideas? Not yet. But for the first time in months, I feel like I have options. We spent the rest of the afternoon talking about practical things. Lawyers, real estate, finances. Sarah had been through her own version of starting over when Paul died, and she had good advice about the mechanics of rebuilding a life. But that evening, after Sarah had gone home and I was alone in the house again, I found myself doing something I hadn't done in years. I took a long hot bath, poured myself a glass of wine, and really thought about what I wanted. Not what I should want, or what would be practical, or what would make other people comfortable. What I actually wanted. I wanted to travel. Not the carefully planned cruises and bus tours that Robert preferred, but real travel. I wanted to see places I'd only read about in the books I'd shelved for 30 years. I wanted to walk through museums in Paris, eat pasta in a small Italian village, watch the sunrise over Machu Picchu. I wanted to learn something new. Maybe a language or how to paint, or how to cook something more adventurous than pot roast and casseroles. I wanted to feel excited about something again. I wanted to wake up in the morning looking forward to the day, instead of just getting through it. I wanted to remember what it felt like to be Margaret, not Mrs. Sullivan, not the children's mother, not the librarian, but Margaret. The person I'd been before I'd defined myself entirely through my relationships to other people. When Robert came home that night, late, as usual, I was reading in bed with a cup of chamomile tea. He stood in the doorway looking uncertain. How was your day? I asked, not looking up from my book. Fine, yours. Productive? I called a lawyer. We have an appointment next week. Robert nodded. I suppose I should do the same. I suppose you should. He started to undress, then paused. Maggie, are you angry with me? I considered the question. Was I angry? I'd been furious yesterday, and devastated the day before that. But now, not angry, I said finally. Disappointed, yes. Hurt, certainly. But not angry. Why not? Because being angry would require me to care more about your choices than I do about my own future. I closed my book and looked at him. For months, I've been focused on what you were doing, who you were with, what you were thinking. But what you do with your life isn't my responsibility anymore. What I do with mine is. Robert sat down heavily on the edge of the bed. I never wanted this to happen. Yes, you did. Maybe not consciously, but you made choices that led us here. And now we're here. Do you hate me? I thought about it. Did I hate him? This man who'd broken his promises, who'd lied to me for months, who'd fallen in love with someone else while I was planning what to make for dinner? No, I said, surprising myself. I don't hate you. I think you're selfish and cowardly. And I think you handled this situation badly. But I don't hate you. I do love you, Maggie. Maybe not the way I should, but, Robert. I held up my hand to stop him. It doesn't matter anymore. The kind of love you have for me isn't enough to build a marriage on, and the kind of love I have for you isn't enough either. We can love each other and still not be right for each other. He was quiet for a moment. What do you think will happen to us? After the divorce, I mean. I don't know. Maybe we'll be friends eventually. Maybe we won't. Maybe we'll see each other at the children's weddings and graduations and be polite. Maybe we'll discover we actually like each other better when we're not married to each other. And maybe Linda and I won't work out, and I'll realize I've made the biggest mistake of my life. I looked at him with something that might have been pity. Maybe. But if that happens, Robert, you're going to have to live with it. Because I'm not going to be your backup plan. The next morning I woke up feeling lighter than I had in months. Not happy. There was still too much pain and uncertainty for happiness. But free. For the first time in 42 years, I didn't have to consider anyone else's needs or preferences when I made my plans for the day. I could eat what I wanted for breakfast. I could go where I wanted to go. I could spend my time on things that interested me, not things that needed to be done for the household or the family or my husband's comfort. I was 67 years old, and I was about to be single for the first time since I was 25. It was terrifying. It was also kind of exciting. The lawyer's office smelled like leather and coffee, with the kind of expensive, intimidating atmosphere that made me want to apologize for taking up space. But as I sat across from Patricia Hendricks, I felt steadier than I'd expected. So, Mrs. Sullivan, you're seeking a no-fault divorce based on irreconcilable differences, Patricia said, reviewing the notes she'd taken during our initial consultation. That's correct? And your husband has admitted to an extramarital affair? Yes. For how long? 6 months, according to him. Patricia made another note. Has he expressed willingness to cooperate with the divorce proceedings? Yes. He knows this marriage is over? Good. That will make things much simpler. Patricia set down her pen and looked at me with kind but professional eyes. Mrs. Sullivan, I have to ask, are you certain about this decision? 42 years is a significant investment. Some couples find that marriage counseling. I'm certain, I said firmly. This isn't a decision I made lightly or in anger. We both know our marriage has been over for a long time. The affair was just the final acknowledgement of what we'd both been avoiding. Patricia nodded. Then let's talk about what you want from this divorce. What I wanted was simple fairness, dignity, and the ability to move forward without being financially destroyed. Connecticut was an equitable distribution state, which meant our assets would be divided fairly rather than automatically split 50-50. Given Robert's affair and his financial infidelity, spending our joint savings on another woman, Patricia thought I had a strong case for a favorable settlement. What about the house? She asked. I'd been thinking about that question for days. The Colonial in Westport held 40 years of memories, but it also felt like a museum of a life I no longer wanted to live. Every room reminded me of the woman I'd been, Robert's wife, the children's mother, the perfect suburban housewife who'd lost herself somewhere along the way. I want to sell it and split the proceeds, I said. I don't want to live there anymore. Patricia raised an eyebrow. You're sure? It's a beautiful home in an excellent school district. The market value, I'm sure, that house belongs to the person I used to be. I want to find out who I am now. After the meeting, I drove to the grocery store and did something I hadn't done in years. I bought only things I actually wanted to eat. No more pot roast, because it was Robert's favorite. No more whole wheat bread, because it was healthier even though I preferred white. I bought strawberries because I loved them, expensive cheese because it made me happy, and a bottle of wine because I felt like celebrating something I couldn't quite name yet. When I got home, Robert's car was in the driveway. I found him in his office, packing books into boxes. Starting early? I asked. He looked up, startled. I thought it would be easier if I moved some of my things out gradually. Less disruptive. Where are you going? Linda has a spare bedroom. Just temporarily. Until we figure out something more permanent. Of course he was moving in with Linda Chen. The efficiency of it was almost impressive. He could end one relationship and seamlessly transition to the next without even a night of sleeping alone. Have you called the children yet? I asked. Robert's face tightened. I thought we could do that together. Present a united front. No, Robert, this was your choice. You get to explain it? Maggie, please. They're going to have questions. They're going to need to understand that this isn't about them choosing sides. Then you should probably focus on how you explain it, rather than trying to drag me into covering for you. Robert set down the book he'd been holding. I know you're angry. I'm not angry. I'm done. I leaned against the doorframe, watching him pack up pieces of the life we'd shared. Robert, for months I tried to figure out what was wrong. What I could do differently, how I could fix whatever was broken between us. But you'd already checked out. You'd already decided our marriage was over? You just didn't have the courage to tell me. That's not. Yes, it is. You made your choice 6 months ago when you decided Linda Chen was more important than our marriage vows. Everything since then has just been aftermath. Robert stood up, his face flushed. Fine. I'll call the kids this weekend and explain everything. Is that what you want? I want you to take responsibility for your choices. That's all I've ever wanted. After Robert left with his first load of boxes, I called my oldest child, Michael, in Seattle. Mom, this is a nice surprise. How are you and Dad doing? The innocent happiness in his voice made my chest tight. Michael was 39 years old, a successful architect with 2 teenage sons of his own. He still called every Sunday and sent flowers on Mother's Day and believed his parents had a solid, loving marriage. Michael, I need to tell you something, and I need you to sit down. The tone of my voice must have warned him, because his voice immediately became serious. What's wrong? Are you sick? Is Dad okay? We're both healthy. But your father and I are getting divorced. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought we might have been disconnected. Michael, are you there? I'm here. His voice sounded young, confused. Mom, what do you mean you're getting divorced? You've been married for 42 years. You don't just, did something happen? Your father has been having an affair. Another long silence. Then, quietly, Jesus Christ, I'm sorry, sweetheart. I know this is a shock. How long? How long has this been going on? 6 months. And you just found out. I suspected for a while, but I confirmed it a few weeks ago. Mom? Michael's voice cracked slightly. I don't understand. Dad's having an affair. Dad, are you sure? I'm sure. Who is she? I gave him the basic facts. Linda Chen, former colleague, divorced. Robert had admitted to being in love with her. I can't believe this, Michael said. I just talked to him 2 weeks ago. He sounded normal. He sounded like Dad. He is still your father, Michael. This doesn't change that, doesn't it? How can I ever look at him the same way? I didn't have an answer for that. I'd been wondering the same thing myself. What about you, Mom? Are you okay? Do you need me to come home? I'm managing. And no, you don't need to come home. I'm handling the legal side of things, and I have Sarah for support. What are you going to do? Where are you going to live? We're selling the house. I'm going to find a place of my own. You're selling the house? Michael sounded stunned. Mom, that's our childhood home. All our memories are still our memories, sweetheart. But I need to make new ones. We talked for another half hour, Michael asking questions I couldn't always answer and struggling to process the end of what he'd thought was a stable, happy marriage. Before we hung up, he made me promise to call if I needed anything, and I made him promise not to be too hard on his father. He made a terrible choice, I told him, but he's still your dad. And he loves you kids more than anything in the world. If he loved us so much, maybe he should have thought about how this would affect us before he started cheating on our mother. I couldn't argue with that logic. The conversations with Jennifer and David were similar. Shock, disbelief, anger, and a million questions I couldn't answer. Jennifer, ever the doctor, wanted to analyze what had gone wrong and whether there was any way to fix it. David, the teacher, was furious at Robert's complete lack of integrity and moral leadership. By Sunday evening, I was emotionally drained but also oddly relieved. The secret was out. The pretense was over. Our children knew the truth, and while they were hurt and angry, they were also adults who would eventually find their own ways to process and accept this new reality. Monday morning, I did something I hadn't done in 2 years. I got up early, put on my best dress, and went job hunting. Not because I needed the money. Our retirement savings, minus Robert's extramarital expenses, would be adequate for my needs, but because I needed purpose. I needed to remember what it felt like to be valued for my skills and experience rather than just my ability to manage a household. The Westport Library had an opening for a part-time research specialist. It wasn't my old job. That position had been filled when I retired. But it was work I could do with my eyes closed. More importantly, it was a step toward independence. Margaret Sullivan, the branch manager, a woman about my daughter's age, looked surprised when I walked in. I thought you were retired. I was. I am. But circumstances have changed, and I'm looking for part-time work. Well, you're certainly qualified. Are you sure you want to come back? It's only 20 hours a week, and the pay is much less than what you were making as head librarian. I'm sure. That afternoon, I drove to a travel agency in downtown Westport. The young woman behind the counter looked like she could barely believe anyone still used travel agents instead of booking trips online. I want to plan a trip, I told her. Something I've never done before. Somewhere I've never been. Okay, she said, pulling out a notebook. What kind of budget are we working with? And when would you like to travel? After my divorce is finalized. Probably late summer or early fall. As for budget, I thought about the money Robert had spent on Linda Chen. The jewelry, the dinners, the romantic getaway. Let's say $15,000. I want to do it right. The travel agent's eyes lit up. $15,000 will take you almost anywhere you want to go. What interests you? Beach destinations? Cultural tours? Adventure travel? All of it, I said, laughing at my own answer. I want to see things I've only read about. I want to eat food I can't pronounce. I want to have conversations with people who don't know anything about who I used to be. We spent an hour looking at brochures and websites. Italy called to me, the art, the history, the food, the landscape. So did Ireland, with its green hills and literary heritage, and France, with its museums and cafes and centuries of stories written in stone. What about a multi-country tour? The travel agent suggested. 3 weeks, 4 countries. You could see London, Paris, Rome, and Dublin. Get a taste of different cultures and then decide where you might want to go back for longer trips. 3 weeks. In 42 years of marriage, Robert and I had never taken a vacation longer than 10 days. The longest trip I'd ever taken by myself was a weekend conference in Boston 15 years ago. That sounds perfect, I said. When I got home, Robert was in the kitchen making himself a sandwich. He looked up when I walked in, and I saw something in his expression I hadn't seen in months: curiosity. You look different, he said. Happy. I am happy. Because we're getting divorced. Because I'm finally doing things for myself instead of just reacting to things you do. I poured myself a glass of water and leaned against the counter. I got a job today, part-time at the library. You did? And I booked a trip to Europe. 3 weeks, 4 countries. Robert's eyebrows rose. Europe. You've never wanted to travel internationally. I've always wanted to travel internationally. You never wanted to travel internationally. We looked at each other across the kitchen where we'd shared thousands of meals and conversations and ordinary moments of married life. For the first time in years, I felt like I was seeing Robert clearly, not as my husband or the father of my children or my longtime companion, but as a separate person with his own wants and fears and limitations. Are you going to be okay? He asked quietly. I'm going to be fine, I said. Better than fine, actually. I think I'm going to be happy. I hope so. I really do hope so. What about you? Are you happy? Robert considered the question seriously. I think I will be. Linda and I. It feels right, Maggie. It feels like the relationship I want to have. Then I hope it works out for you. And surprisingly, I realized I meant it. I hoped Robert and Linda Chen found whatever it was they were looking for together. I hoped he treated her better than he'd treated me in the end. I hoped she made him feel as vital and important as he wanted to feel. Because their happiness was no longer my responsibility. My happiness was. 6 months later, the apartment in downtown Westport wasn't large. Just 2 bedrooms, a cozy living room, and a kitchen that looked out over the town green. But it was entirely mine. Every piece of furniture, every book on the shelves, every painting on the walls reflected my taste, my choices, my vision of what home should feel like. I'd kept very little from the colonial house that Robert and I had shared for so many years. A few family photos, some books that held sentimental value, free. My grandmother's china that I'd never used when I was trying to keep everything perfect for a husband who barely noticed. Now I used those beautiful plates for my Tuesday morning breakfast. Just because they made me happy. The divorce had been finalized 3 weeks ago. Fair but not generous, exactly as I'd wanted. Robert had repaid the money he'd spent on his affair. It had required him to take a part-time consulting job, legitimate this time, and sell his golf club membership. The house had sold for more than we'd expected, giving us each a comfortable nest egg for our separate futures. Robert and Linda were living together now in a modern condo closer to Hartford. According to our children, who were slowly adjusting to this new reality, he seemed happy. Linda had even sent me a card after the divorce was finalized, a simple note saying she was sorry for the pain the situation had caused and that she hoped I would find peace and happiness. It was gracious of her, I supposed. And I found that I didn't hate her anymore. She hadn't destroyed my marriage, she'd simply been there when Robert decided to abandon it. If it hadn't been Linda Chen, it probably would have been someone else, eventually. This morning, I was sitting at my small kitchen table, drinking coffee from my favorite mug and reviewing my itinerary for tomorrow. After months of planning, my European adventure was finally beginning. 3 weeks, 4 countries, and a guidebook filled with restaurants and museums and experiences I'd been dreaming about for decades. "Are you nervous?" Sarah asked when she stopped by to pick up my spare key and water my plants while I was gone. "Terrified," I admitted, laughing. "I've never traveled alone before, never been on a plane by myself, never navigated a foreign city without someone else handling the logistics. But excited too. Incredibly excited." I showed her the carefully organized folder where I'd kept all my confirmation numbers, maps, and research notes. "I feel like a kid on Christmas morning," Sarah smiled. "You look different, you know. You've looked different for months now." "Different how?" "Lighter, younger. More yourself, if that makes sense." It did make sense. For the first time in decades, I felt like Margaret rather than Mrs. Sullivan or Michael and Jennifer and David's mother. Just Margaret, a 67-year-old woman who was finally figuring out what she wanted from life. The job at the library had been perfect for this transition period. 20 hours a week of work I enjoyed, helping people find information and resources, staying connected to the community, but not overwhelmed by responsibilities. My colleagues had been wonderful, treating me like a valued professional rather than someone's grandmother filling time. And next month, when I returned from Europe, I was starting something even more exciting, a master's degree program in art history at the University of Connecticut. At 67, I was going back to school to study something I'd always been passionate about, but never had time to pursue seriously. My children had been amazed by the changes in me. Michael had visited last month and spent most of his time marveling at my new apartment, my travel plans, my return to school. "Mom, I've never seen you like this," he'd said over dinner at my favorite new restaurant, a small Italian place where I'd become a regular. "You seem so confident." "I feel confident," I'd told him. "For the first time in years, I feel like I know what I want and I'm not afraid to go after it." Jennifer had been more analytical, as usual. "Do you think you would have made these changes if Dad hadn't had the affair?" she'd asked during one of our weekly phone calls. It was a good question. Would I have found the courage to leave my safe, comfortable, limiting life if Robert hadn't forced the issue by falling in love with someone else? "I don't know," I'd answered honestly. "Maybe eventually. But maybe not. Maybe I would have just continued sleepwalking through the next 20 years. David, my youngest, had been the most direct. "Are you glad it happened?" "The affair?" I'd thought about that question for a long time before answering. Was I glad my husband had betrayed our marriage vows, lied to me for months, and shattered the life we'd built together? "I'm glad I found out who I am when I'm not trying to be who someone else needs me to be," I'd finally said. "I'm glad I discovered I'm braver and stronger and more capable than I thought I was. I'm not glad your father chose to handle his unhappiness the way he did, but I'm grateful for where it led me." Now, sitting in my sunny kitchen with my suitcase packed and my passport ready, I felt that gratitude more deeply than ever. My phone rang, Robert's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment I hesitated. We'd been maintaining polite contact for the sake of the children and to handle the final details of untangling our shared life, but we rarely spoke unless it was necessary. "Hello, Robert." "Hi, Maggie. I hope I'm not bothering you. I know you're leaving for your trip tomorrow." "You're not bothering me." "What's up?" I wanted to. He paused, and I could hear him struggling for words. "I wanted to say that I'm proud of you. For everything you've done these past few months. The job, the travel plans, going back to school. You seem really happy." "I am happy. I'm glad. And I wanted to apologize again. Not for ending our marriage. I think we both know that needed to happen, but for how I handled it. You deserved better than lies and deception." "Yes, I did. Linda says I should have been honest with you from the beginning. She says I was a coward for carrying on behind your back instead of having the difficult conversation. Linda's a smart woman, she is. And she's right." Robert cleared his throat. "Anyway, I hope you have an amazing trip. I hope you see everything you want to see. Thank you. And Maggie, I want you to know that I did love you. I do love you. Maybe not the way a husband should love a wife, but you were a good partner for a lot of years. A good mother. A good person. I hope you know that none of this was about you not being enough." The old me might have cried at those words. The old me might have wondered if there was still a chance to save our marriage, if Robert was having second thoughts about Linda Chen, but the new me, Margaret, not Mrs. Sullivan, simply felt grateful for apology and ready to move forward. I know, I said. And Robert, I hope you and Linda are very happy together. I really do. After we hung up, I finished my coffee and reviewed my itinerary one more time. Tomorrow I would fly to London, where I had a hotel reservation in Bloomsbury and tickets to 3 museums. From there, Paris, where I planned to spend entire days wandering through the Louvre and the Musée d'Orsay. Then Rome, with its layers of history and incredible food. Finally, Dublin, where I wanted to visit the Trinity College Library and maybe take a day trip to the countryside. 3 weeks of experiences chosen entirely for my own pleasure and curiosity. 3 weeks of being completely responsible for my own happiness. 3 weeks of discovering what adventure felt like when you were free to create your own. That evening, I had dinner with Sarah at our favorite wine bar to celebrate my last night in town. Any final thoughts? She asked, raising her glass in a toast. Any wisdom you want to share before you become a sophisticated world traveler? I thought about the question seriously. 6 months ago, I'd been a woman who felt invisible in her own marriage, who suspected her husband was having an affair but was afraid to confirm it, who couldn't imagine a future that looked different from her past. I think, I said slowly, that we spend so much time trying to hold on to things that aren't working because we're afraid of the unknown. But sometimes the unknown is exactly where we need to be. Meaning maybe the best thing that ever happened to me was finding out that the life I thought I wanted wasn't actually the life I needed. Sarah smiled. Look at you, getting all philosophical in your old age. 67 isn't old anymore, I said laughing. 67 is just the beginning of the next chapter. The next morning, I stood in my apartment with my suitcase by the door, taking one last look around. The sunlight streaming through my kitchen window illuminated the small stack of mail I'd need to deal with when I returned, the coffee cup I'd wash when I got back, the life that would be waiting for me. But for now, I was leaving it all behind. For the next 3 weeks I would be accountable to no one but myself. I would eat when I was hungry, sleep when I was tired, and spend my days looking at beautiful things simply because they brought me joy. As I locked my apartment door and headed to the car that would take me to the airport, I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago. She'd been so afraid of change, so committed to maintaining a status quo that wasn't making anyone happy. She'd been so focused on being a good wife that she'd forgotten how to be herself. I felt sorry for that woman, but I was also grateful to her. Her willingness to investigate, to demand the truth, to refuse to accept less than she deserved, that had made everything else possible. At the airport, as I checked in for my flight to London, the ticket agent smiled at me. Traveling alone today, Mrs. Sullivan? Yes, I said, and the word felt like freedom. I'm traveling alone. But as I walked toward the security line with my passport in hand and my future spread out before me like a map waiting to be explored, I realized I wasn't alone at all. For the first time in my adult life, I had exactly the companion I needed myself. The woman I was always meant to be was finally ready for her adventure.